Hi everyone, this is your EPQ introductory lecture done remotely, which I think has got to be the first time ever, but needs must this year. We'd really love to have you all in the hall for a lecture, but as you know, the hall is completely out of action, and rather than delay things unnecessarily, we thought we would just get started. So I'm afraid you're going to have to listen to another one of those video presentations, but the good news is it's just my voice. You won't have to look at my ugly mug. But hopefully this is going to take you through at least a bit of an introduction to EPQ, and if you've got any questions afterwards, you'll have the benefit of being able to ask your supervisor, and if they can't answer your questions, then either myself or Mr. Morgan can definitely help you. So hopefully this will give you enough to at least get thinking about it and get that beginning process underway. So a lot of people ask me when talking about EPQ, they say, why should I do one? What's the benefit to me? And you know, the benefits are far-reaching. It isn't just an academic project that will give you loads of academic skills. There are actually a lot of things such as good time management, being able to assimilate lots of information, prioritize, and also reflect, which are skills that you need for pretty much any job that you decide to go and do. But if you do go on to higher education, the skills that you're going to get from this are completely invaluable. And to be honest, not just for higher education, but over the course of your A-level study, you will definitely benefit from having undertaken EPQ and also the taught skills, which is what we're going to be doing in these lectures. So let's just have a little bit of a think about it. You see things in the media all the time, and you hear things on the news saying, you know, graduates are not ready, you know, they need to have better skills for their careers, and so there are all those sorts of things that actually come across better if you've done an EPQ, and certainly when you go to university you'll be at an advantage if you've already done lots of these sorts of skills. Most people, they have to figure it out for themselves when they actually get there, and that's certainly what I had to do, and it really is quite tricky to do by yourself. So by doing this, it definitely will mean that you are better prepared, but not just for university life. Remember, it is skills for life. All of those kind of communication, problem solving, presenting skills, you need to do that often within your job, and if you've had to deliver a presentation as part of the EPQ, that will give you really good skills should you ever have to stand up at work and deliver a presentation or take that on board as part of anything that you are doing in your career. But if we think about it university related to start with, it gives you that kind of foot in the door in terms of knowing a lot about sometimes a very weird and wonderful topic, and that can be great when you've got your interview. You know, interviews are tricky enough, and if you've got something that you're really passionate about and you've spent a lot of time on, that can give you confidence when you have an interview because you can talk about it. It's also going to give you an extra AS level, so more UCAS points. And you know, as we all know, it's very competitive to get into university, and so having got that little bit of extra pointage, if you like, gives you that heads up that other people wouldn't necessarily have. As I've said to you already, it really will help with your decision making and your problem solving ability. And not just that, but also your use of initiative and making decisions and having to do that on your own in a very enterprising way. You'll be surprised at how much you learn. Clearly you're going to need a lot of academic skills too, so things like being able to plan and research and then think critically about and then analyse. Those are skills that are really useful, and they will definitely be an integral part of your project. You have to undertake each one of those skills pretty much in order to get a really good mark in your EPQ, and we will take you through quite a lot of those during the taught sessions, and even hopefully, if all things go according to plan, we normally have somebody come in from Southampton University and help us with those as well, and she will give you kind of a really good insight into what universities are looking for with those skills. Hopefully that's going to happen. If it doesn't, I'm sure that we can do it remotely. But by the end of your EPQ, all of those skills will be really, really honed. You'll be surprised at how good you've become at all of those things. And if you don't feel good at them, at least you will have had a go at doing them, particularly the presentation. People worry about that one a lot. And it really isn't something that you should worry about too much. But one thing's for certain, doing it now will help you if you ever have to do one again. So basically, in other words, if you do your EPQ, it will no doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, improve your application for university. But it also will give you lots of employable skills as well. And they are things that you can talk about and you can explain, and it gives you that starting point if you have to talk to somebody about your course or your job that you want to go for. So if you are applying to university, your EPQ can definitely support your application. We've had situations where people have had a reduced offer, so lower grades offered to them if they get a certain grade in their EPQ. It can also mean that your application gets preference over other people who haven't done EPQ. So that tends to happen on courses where it's very, very selective, very competitive. You know, they can literally go through and decide, right, those students are having an interview, those students are not, based on whether or not people have done an EPQ. It also gives you something to talk about in your personal statement. So you might have heard in your tutor times the year 13s talking to their tutors about personal statements. It's a really tricky thing to write, and the more content that you can put in that's valuable and insightful into you as a person, the better. And having done your EPQ, it will give you a little bit extra to talk about in there that other people won't have. And then, as I've already mentioned, it gives you a really big focus for your interview. So if you are applying for a course that has an interview, and certainly they don't all have them, but many do, it gives you a focus, it gives you a starting point. And also if you're going for an apprenticeship or a job, that's the same thing there. You've still got something to talk about. It, you know, it will be very valuable. Okay, so what is an EPQ? That's something that I won't be able to fully answer now, I'll be honest with you. EPQ is something you have to understand, and it takes you a while to get your head around what it actually is. As I'm recording this PowerPoint now, I'm sat here with a stack of EPQs from previous years, which I've just been having a look through, just to get a few ideas and things out of for this presentation. And I could show you them, and that would give you an idea, but it still wouldn't give you the overall feeling. I think it's very much something that you grow into and you understand more about as you go along. But fundamentally, in a quick nutshell, there are two types of EPQ project. So it is an academic project, but the amount of written work that you have to produce varies depending on whether you choose the more traditional route, which is essentially a written report, an essay, and that's 5,000 words. Or you can choose to produce what's called an artifact project, and these are the ones where people have made something or put something on for show. I'll go through a few examples in a moment, and their time has been invested into the research and design and development of the thing that they're making or displaying. And then there is only a 1,000 word report to write from that. And I'll explain a little bit more about the two different types in a moment, but that's fundamentally what they are. You still have to produce the same record keeping depending on which one you do, so you still do the same production log. You still have to have the same amount of sessions with your supervisor. It's really just the kind of overall finished product that ends up being different. So if we deal with the artifact project first of all, people often think, oh, I'll do one of those, it'll be less work, it'll be a lot easier. It really isn't. Actually, they tend to be more work, because these are the ones where people end up usually making something. And so actually going through that learning process of learning how to do that and then actually realizing it and producing it can take a long time. But that said, it suits a lot of people's learning styles better than an essay. So if you choose to do an artifact, you've got to be able to show your progress through the production of whatever it is you're making. So that might be through a diary, it might be through, a sketchbook, a production log. People tend to photograph the different stages and talk about what skills they've used as they've gone along. You then need to do a 1,000 word report which explains the process you've been through, so the problems you encounter, how you've improved it, all your decision making, ways that you had to overcome things. All of that goes into a report at the end. You still need to produce a detailed bibliography, just like you would for the standard type of report, because you will still have done plenty of research. You'll have done your research initially into what it was that you were actually going to make or do. So there are a few examples here of ones that we've had recently. So somebody made a mood light to help autistic children, and so their research was around autism to begin with, and what that was and what sorts of things might help, and they did some primary research by talking to people. So it certainly wasn't just a case of, oh well, I'll just make a light. We've had a booklet given to children who are diagnosed with diabetes, so that again involved researching about diabetes, but also then looking at how best to portray that to children, what sort of language to use, what sort of imagery, that kind of thing. Somebody put on a dodgeball competition for charity, so that was more about event management, planning the event, running it, thinking about all the the pitfalls and what might happen, and then the promotion of it as well. We've had web pages being made before, and in fact you will use a piece of software called EPQ Spaces, which is an online version of the exam board's production log, and that was originally an EPQ project of a student who was at Clevedon School, and so for his EPQ he made this software designed to support EPQs, and he now sells that to other schools, us being one of them. So he's done really well out of that. We've had a talent show put on again for charity. We've had a quilt, one of those activity quilts for babies, so what kind of textures and things do they prefer. We had the most amazing project where a student wrote and illustrated a children's book, and quite honestly it could have been published, it was so good. So there really are lots and lots of diverse things that people can do, and you can pretty much do anything. We've certainly had dresses being made, and we've had a clock. Trying to think of other things that we've had over the period of time, and those things people have had to think about what skills they need to acquire in order to do that. So sometimes that involves using CAD software, for example, or 3D printing, and people have never used those sorts of things before, so they've had to learn a new skill, and that's all part of it as well. So that's what an EPQ is if you do the artifact, and certainly if you are somebody who prefers to do something a bit more creative, a bit more sort of out there, and involves skills that might be linked to engineering or design or just events, that might suit you more than writing a more formal traditional essay. But it doesn't suit everybody, and so you really do need to think about whether or not it's something you want to do, but it definitely isn't the easy option. So if you choose to do the more traditional essay type project, this is more what you might imagine an EPQ to be about. It sounds a lot, doesn't it, 5,000 words, but believe it or not, that's actually not very much. It takes people ages to cut it down because it ends up being too long. The exam board are not hugely strict, sort of 5,000 words plus or minus 500, they're not going to mind. But if you suddenly produced a 10,000 word essay or only a 2,000 word essay, that would limit you. And again, you need a detailed bibliography of all of your research. And this one, it tends to be linked to an area of interest. So you can pick anything you like to be your topic, in the same way you can do anything you like for your artifact. But you have to come up with a question to solve. So the question is the most crucial part to this particular type of EPQ. I can't stress that to you enough, and in fact it will evolve. You won't have a full title to begin with. You'll have an idea, and it will almost certainly be very big, and and quite broad, and what tends to happen is people's titles evolve over the first half of the project. So once you get underway with your research, you think, oh, actually I prefer this tiny aspect of it, or I think I might go down this route. And so your title kind of firms itself up over the first half of the project, and in fact you don't have to officially have your finished title until the mid-project review. So it very much does become a work in progress, and we spend quite a lot of time at the beginning talking to you about titles, because it needs to be a project that is going to enable you full access to the full marking range, and you're not going to get that if your title is really limited and narrow. So what I mean by that are titles that are very descriptive, where you would write an essay about something. For example, the Kings and Queens of England over the last 500 years. That would be a terrible title, because it doesn't give you any scope for discussion, for evaluation, for critical thinking, arguing for or against. There's none of that. It would simply be, oh, I've done all this research, here it is. That would narrow your marks down, right down to the lowest marking band. So it needs to be a title that you definitely don't know the answer to at the beginning, because if you already know the answer, then you're going to be bored. It needs to be a title that's got scope for debate and critique and evaluation and a wide aspect of resource drawing from, if you like, so that you can draw out arguments, you can look at data, you can draw it all together, and you can make your own conclusion. So you do need to think carefully about the wording of your title and your topics, because we've had some terrible titles that we've had to reject quite late on in projects. So it is very important to get this right at the beginning. But like I say, you don't have to have the wording of the title fully justified at the start. You'll have an idea, which is what you do in the first few sessions with your supervisor. You have these discussions, oh, I think I might like to do my project on this topic, and then you start thinking around that and think of aspects of that topic. You go away and you do a bit of initial research, maybe a bit of a literature review, and then you firm up your working title for the beginning part of your project, and that's what you then propose to your supervisor as your title. And there are official documents that you fill in your production log to submit your title for approval, and your supervisor has to approve it, and then myself and Mr. Morgan as centre supervisors, we also then have the final say in whether or not your title goes ahead. So there are lots of points where it can get checked, and then once your title has been approved, you can begin your project. So I've included some of the more recent ones that we've had here to give you a flavour for the sorts of debate, and I'm not going to explain all of them, but you can see from them that they've definitely got arguments for and against. For example, this opt-out system, is it a life-saving system or a life-limiting system? And the student that did that, they really did look at both sides of the argument and firmed up their own ideas on it. We've had who is to blame for the 2008 financial crisis, banks or the government? We've had how is the perceived time different to the theories of time put forward in physics and philosophy? I've made some typos in that, and that sentence does not make any sense at all, but I can't change it now because the PowerPoint's recording, so never mind, don't worry. We've had Jurassic Park, fact or fiction. She really looked at the ideas of, was it ethical to revive dinosaurs through genetic engineering? And initially her title was way broader than that. She wanted to look at all of the ethics of genetic engineering, of all different sorts of organisms, and she really did end up narrowing it down to something that she was genuinely really interested in, but also just one field of that, which was dinosaurs. This was quite a good one, footballers' wages, are they justified? So the student really looked at all the mathematics, the media, all those sorts of things, and came up with her justification. What drives a serial killer to kill? Now that is quite a closed title, but it turned out to be a really good project. The student really did actually look at all the different arguments and came up with a conclusion. Dark matter, how do we know it's there if we can't see it? Was one from a few years ago, but again a really good physics related one, which the student really enjoyed delving into the depths of physics. What else have we got? The importance of the Thames barrier. Does it need improvement for its continued effectiveness? And that student was doing a lot of geography and she was interested in looking at the flooding risks involved. So there's loads of different ideas there. And my best suggestion to you when you're doing your initial planning, which you will be doing with your supervisor after this presentation and in your next lecture or your next supervisor slot, you need to start kind of brainstorming ideas. You know, what interests you? What are your passions? Have you got hobbies? Have you got career aspirations? Do you think you might want to focus it on one of your, extending one of your subjects? Anything at all, but you need to really kind of get those ideas down now, so that they might all be completely different. You might have 3 or 4 different ideas and you want to go away and look at them, and then you'll pick one. Okay, so I've mentioned the assessment of it a little bit, and there's absolutely no point in me running through how it's marked because it's really complicated and I don't want to bore you with that at the minute. But it's always marked in the same way, and the grade boundaries have never changed in the whole time that I have taught EPQ, which is a very long time. So you get marked out of 50, and they give you mark bands. So you're marked in band 1, and if you've met all those criteria you can move into band 2, and if you meet those criteria you can move into band 3. And it's band 3 where you really want to be able to be, because that's where the highest marks are. So the project's marked on your planning and your use of resources. So this is all your different research techniques, your application of that, your wider reading, all those sorts of things. There's a huge chunk of marks given over to your problem solving and modifications. More about this later, but your kind of management of your project is actually where the majority of the marks come from. People think the essay or the final product gets marked, but actually you get marked on the whole thing from the beginning of your production log, which is the thing that you're going to keep on EPQ spaces, right through to your final reflection. So your production log forms a huge chunk of your marks. So actually keeping a record of every decision that you've made, every plan that you had, every time it went wrong, every time you changed your mind, all of those things are actually really important. And then you also get marked on your ability to evaluate how it's gone at the end, giving you a total out of 50. So the way we hope, COVID planning obviously aside, but we hope it will go along these sorts of lines where you're at the point now where you're making your initial planning, and then you get your project approved. So there are documents that you have to fill in the exam board production log, which you will fill in on EPQ spaces. You have to submit those for your project to be approved. Once that happens, you can then review your planning of your project. You start thinking about your next steps, you begin your research, start thinking about how it's going to be structured, and that research stage can take quite a long time. Probably it will take you between now and Christmas to actually get that part done. And then you'll be at the mid-project review. So this is the point where your title has to be firmed up by this point. Then you'll write up or finish your artifact, and you'll write your report so that your finished product is made. And at that point you will have some chance to reflect on how it's gone. You then need to move into thinking about your presentation. So you have to deliver a presentation to a small group, and it usually is only 3 or 4 people from your class who you deliver your presentation to. And the presentation normally lasts about 20 minutes. Now that sounds like a really long time, but actually it's usually about 10 or 12 minutes of you actually talking about your project, and then about 8 minutes or so of people asking you questions. So it's not quite as daunting as you might imagine, and we'll talk more about that in the lectures nearer the time. And then you complete a reflection at the end of your project about how it's gone and what you've learned, what was difficult, what was easy, what you will do better next time if you were to use these skills again, remembering that that is a very important part of the project's marks. And then your project's finished, and that usually happens around Easter, because after that time we have to get the projects marked and moderated, ready for them to go off to the exam board. And once your project is kind of at this stage, at the writing up stage, we tend to stop the lectures because we've taught you all of the skills you need to know by that point. and so you then gain a free because you no longer have the lecture. And once you've finished your project, you will no longer need your supervisor sessions, so those also become free periods. So it's worth getting this done, and it isn't something that's going to take you all year. And obviously at the moment, the lecture slot you won't have, but you will have the time with your supervisors where I will hopefully try and deliver these lectures that way. Okay? So just to finish off, a few questions that people often ask. Can you work together? The answer is no, not really. You can if you're doing an artifact and it's going to be a group thing, but it's actually very, very difficult to work out who's done what in that project. And we've not had much success with people doing group projects. So we don't normally say that people can work together because it just means it's very, very difficult. And it should be an individual project, really. You can research an area that you're studying, so one of your A-levels might have a really fascinating topic in there and you would love to do more on it. You need to be very careful of doing that. It's absolutely fine, but as I've put here, it mustn't be anything that you're being taught in class as part of your A-level specification. So for example, in biology, if somebody was doing, they wanted to look into, I don't know, some kind of genetic technology, we do teach that as part of the specification. So long as their project extends beyond what we're teaching in school and it goes to a level that isn't being taught, then that's absolutely fine. But if it was based purely on that A-level content, you're not allowed to do that. It's counted as what's called dual accreditation, and it means that you're essentially being awarded marks for the same thing twice. So you're being awarded marks for it in your exam for that subject, and you're being awarded marks for it in the EPQ. So you're not allowed to do that. So you need to be careful. And what I would suggest you do is, if you do want to do something that possibly is on your specification, just go and talk to your subject teachers about that and ask, you know, if I did this, would it be something that we're being taught, or will this take me beyond the specification? People always say, do they have to do EPQ? You're either doing EPQ or study skills. It's not compulsory that you do EPQ, but you would do study skills instead. My suggestion is that you do the EPQ for now. Some people do decide later on that it isn't for them, and then in which case you can switch to study skills. But certainly the EPQ gets you a qualification. It gets you UCAS points, it gets you an AS grade. It really is worth doing. If you're in this group of people, you've obviously been put here for a reason, either because you chose it or somebody suggested that it would be a good idea. So I would definitely give it a go. The taught skills for study skills are actually quite similar, but you're not going to get a qualification out of it. And then lastly, are the lessons compulsory? Yes, they are. So your EPQ lecture, when it actually starts, will be compulsory, as are your sessions with the supervisors. So failure to attend those would result in just the normal school sanctions. Okay, I think that's everything that I wanted to say. I appreciate this is not ideal, and I've certainly waffled quite a lot, but I hope that it's given you an introduction, and it's given you and also your supervisor a chance to hear the presentation that you would have had in the hall. If you do have any questions that your supervisors can't answer, you can always send me an email or come and find me. And then now what I want you to do with your supervisor in the remaining time, and also in your next supervisor session, is to begin thinking about your initial ideas. Some brainstorming ideas are available for your supervisors to do with you, and it would be a really good idea for you to start thinking about aspects of your life, really. What interests you? What have you heard recently in the news? What's your passion? What's a hobby that you're really into, or what subjects you really love? And start brainstorming ideas out of there and coming together with some thoughts. You won't have a definite plan in mind just yet. Some of you might, but it's very unlikely. But that will definitely come if the more thought you put in. And you will need to go away and start doing a bit of research to get some ideas as to whether that would be something you are interested in or not. And I'll leave it up to your supervisors to show you EPQ spaces. Mr. Morgan and I will need to double check that that's all set up, but it should be, so that you can start logging your initial ideas in the correct place. There's also a Google Classroom for EPQ, which I'll check that you've all been assigned to. I presume it's the lecture one. And I can put resources in there that you can use as a student to help you. And then there is also one for the supervisors to use as well. Okay, right. I'll say bye for now, and please just get in touch if you need any further help.